Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So this story, I've been keeping an eye on the story because I'm fascinated by the story. My wife said I get enamored by this stuff. I don't know how you couldn't. I don't know how you don't get enamored by some of this. Spain to impose direct rule over Catalonia as deadline passes. Now, for those who are just coming to the story, Catalonia has a certain amount of autonomy in Spain. Catalonia has made a decision they wanted to be independent, and they had an independence referendum. It's somewhat contested, but the figures go around like 90% of the people who voted in that referendum wanted to leave Spain. Now, Spain sent cops and brutes to beat these people up as they were going to vote. If your job requires you to beat up a voter, something is wrong. If you yourself beat up that voter, something is wrong with you. Something's wrong with you. And yes, I understand hierarchical structures get people to conform to a certain, it's us versus them, and this kind of mentality. It's like when you're working at a company, you're working for the vested interests of the company because ultimately that company pays your salary. The people who you look for, your esteem, and all this other stuff oftentimes go along with the people in that particular company. If that company is doing something unsavory or bad, oftentimes people turn a blind eye because that particular company is the people who are paying their paycheck. Now, I'm making the point that when they're sending out brutes and they're giving them money and they're saying go out and beat up protesters or go out and beat voters, their affinity is for order and for themselves, not you. People often think that cops are out there to protect them. Cops are out there to protect order. That means that they can beat the shit out of you if you're doing something in any way that's causing some level of disorder. Order being determined by state. In this case, going out and vote was a disruption of order. So yes, you're going to have a cop drag a grandmother out by her hair or something like that to prevent her from voting. It didn't matter. Still, 90% of those people said they wanted to leave Spain, regardless of the brutes that they sent down to stop those people from voting. The interesting part of the story, to me, is how far is Catalonia willing to go? At the end of the day, whatever people want to think of state and all this other stuff, those things aren't real. Those things are things that people, for the most part, aggregate around, and they have this structure in their head that somebody might have written down, and they conform to certain rules and everything else. But those things aren't necessarily real. Those are just mental tricks. Those are things that people conform themselves around. The power of that, however, is getting a lot of people to buy into whatever you're selling. And in this case, this is issue or this idea of state, meaning a state can convince people to go somewhere else and murder other people, and that it's okay. Or a state can convince people to go and beat the shit out of voters, and that's, for whatever reason, it's okay. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the only power that state has is force. That's it. When you peel away the layers, when you pluck every card out the deck, the last thing that you're going to get to is, we can beat you and we can imprison you. It's force. It's brute, blunt force. The question becomes, how far is Catalonia willing to go? How far is Spain willing to go? Is Spain willing to send in the military if Catalonia refuses this thing of direct rule? I'm finding the story fascinating. Let me read it. Madrid will press ahead with suspending autonomy on Saturday after Catalan leader refuses to abandon independence push. Now, the last time I looked at this story, he didn't want to give a yes or no on whether or not the independence was going to hold. The Spanish prime minister or president, I don't remember which, essentially made this point of, you need to pick your pony, pick a choice. Which one is it? Are you declaring independence or not? Now, he's asking him that for a very particular point. You need to define what you are. If you're going to say, yes, we are Catalonia and we're declaring that we're independent from Spain, then the Spanish government's going to have a different tenor associated with it, as opposed to we're up for negotiation. Those are two very different conversations. Now, I'm curious. I'm just curious to see how far they're willing to go with this. Both sides on this. How far they're willing to go. Is Spain going to lay siege to Catalonia if Catalonia rebuffs this idea of direct rule? Is Catalonia going to somehow form some kind of militia? How far are these guys willing to go? At the end of the day, the power of state is force. Now, how's Catalonia going to meet that force? I'm just curious. I think it's a good story. The Spanish government is to suspend, and yes, I know there's a reality to it. It's still a good story. The Spanish government is to suspend Catalonia's autonomy and impose direct rule after the region's president refused to abandon the push for independence that has led to Spain's biggest political crisis in 40 years. The announcement of the unprecedented measure came after the Catalan president, Charles, Puigdemont, threatened a unilateral declaration of independence if the Spanish government did not agree to talks on the issue. So he wants to negotiate. We have grievances. We have grievances that we want to talk about. And if you don't want to talk about these grievances, we are leaving. Now, of course, this guy doesn't want to do that. I guarantee you, I would wager anything that he doesn't want to leave. Because leaving has a certain consequence associated with it. This is kind of my point. The reason why he didn't necessarily want to just say, yes, we're independent, that has a consequence. The Spanish government is not necessarily going to turn a blind eye to some province in their country just picking up and leaving. The United States didn't do it either. Countries tend not to allow that just willy-nilly in that way. You know, I can't imagine Texas just saying, yeah, we're seceding from the Union. And Trump just saying, okay. I don't see it. I don't see it. No president, no political leader wants to preside over a country that falls apart. Just vested interest. In a letter to the Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, and I'm sorry for pronouncing that poorly, sent on Thursday morning, the deadline set by Madrid to the region to abandon its independence plans. Puigdemont says discussions were the only way to resolve the crisis. Either you talk to us, or we declare our independence. Now, the Spanish government, on the other hand, is you need to declare your independence or not. Which one is it? Pick a pony. I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by this. The posturing that each side is taking gives a certain degree of their perspective, or at the very least, this idea on the lengths that they don't necessarily want to go. I don't think he wants. Yes, these people may want independence in the abstract. That's fair. And yes, they may go and vote for independence again in the abstract. That's fair. The president of Catalonia has a different job than the people who are voting for independence. Let me say it that way. And ultimately, he's going to be responsible for dealing with the fallout if he declares independence and Spain reacts. The Spanish government is being blunt about, what are you? Are you independent or not? Because they want to be able to kind of kick this thing in gear of, yes, if you're saying you're independent, we're going to take direct rule of your particular province. Otherwise, you need to back down. The problem is, leaders in power, they can't back down. Unless they have an out. Unless you have some ability to save face, backing down is not necessarily an option. You have too many people behind you pushing you. You can't back down in this way. Yeah. You reach a certain point where the leaders themselves are stuck. It's almost like the wind that's pushing them in that way kind of just takes control of events. It's not necessarily what any particular individual wants. It becomes, this is the will of the people behind me, and I don't necessarily have the capacity to back away unless you're giving me an out to back away. They had the referendum. He's asking for talks. The question becomes, is the Spanish government going to allow talks? Or are they just going to have this iron fist of, what are you going to do? Are you independent or not? And if you are independent, we're going to crack it. The Catalan president accused Spanish authorities of seeking to repress the independence movement after two of its leaders were denied bail by a national court judge this week, and said using Article 155 of the 1978 Constitution to impose direct rule from Madrid would force his hand. If you do this, you're forcing my behavior. This is kind of my point. It's almost like the leaders themselves are they're forced. It's almost like you're put in a position where you're forced just based upon the people who are pushing behind you. You're representing something. You're not a singular thing at that point. Well, the thing that you're representing is pushing you hard for a position. So yeah, they're posturing to some degree. The suspension of the independence declaration is still in place. The Spanish state is entitled to decide to apply Article 155 if it secures the Senate's approval, he wrote. But despite all our efforts and despite our desire for dialogue, the fact that the only reply we have been giving is that autonomy will be suspended suggests that you do not understand the problem and do not wish to talk. If the Spanish government persists in hindering dialogue and continues with its repression, the Catalan parliament could, if it deems appropriate, proceed to vote on a formal declaration of independence. This shit is getting hot. In a statement on Thursday morning, the Spanish government said Puigdemont had not confirmed whether the independence had been declared, adding, at an emergency meeting on Saturday, the cabinet would approve measures to be put before the Senate to protect the general interests of Spaniards, including the citizens of Catalonia, and restore the constitutional order in the autonomous community. I think this is fascinating. This video is not going to get a huge number of views, but I think this is fascinating. The Spanish government is saying, you're not leaving. Catalonia is saying, we're not saying we're leaving. We just want to talk. But if you don't want to talk to us, we will have a formal declaration of independence. Now, Spain is saying, you need to tell us whether you're independent or not. We're not having talks with you. You need to tell us whether you're independent. Now, if you are independent, we're going to take direct rule of Catalonia. What does the Catalonian president do? What does the Catalonia parliament or senate, whatever, what do they do if Spain calls for Article 155 and saying we are now taking direct rule of Catalonia? What does Catalonia do? What is Catalonia's counter move? Do they bend and break and fold and give in to the Spanish desire? Or do they find some other legal recourse? Do they form a militia? This is fascinating. This is fascinating. Because ultimately you're peeling away what the power of state is. All of this financial regulation and sanctions and all this other stuff, that's great. When you get down to brass tacks, however, we're sending goons to beat your head in. If these guys, the president and all this other stuff in Catalonia are going to do this, are they going to arrest the president of Catalonia? Are they going to arrest the people in the Senate of Catalonia? Oh, like, I find this to be a fascinating story. According to Article 155, which has never been used, the Spanish government will need to lodge a formal complaint with Puigdemont, then submit its proposals to the Senate for debate and approval. As a result, it would be at least a few days before the concrete steps are taken. This week, a Spanish government spokesman said that Article 155 had been designed to not remove Catalonia's autonomy, but to ensure its autonomous governments adhere to the law. Bullshit. Hate this political dialogue. Hey, Article 155 is not to take away your autonomy. We just want to make sure you comply with the law. That law being that you're under Spanish rule. Come on. Come on. You can be honest and hold a position saying you don't want Catalonia to leave. I don't think it's insane for the Spanish government to say we don't want Catalonia to leave. From the Spanish government's perspective and from somebody who's in the Spanish, you know, the president of Spain or prime minister. Yes, of course, he's not going to want them to leave. That's his vested interest. That's not wrong for him having that vested interest. That's his vested interest. By the same token, it is also not necessarily wrong or crazy for people to have this idea of self-determination. And if Catalonia decides they want to leave, then it's not necessarily wrong for Catalonia to want to leave. You have interests that diverge from one another. The question becomes, how do you resolve those interests that diverge? Catalonia is asking for talks. It doesn't sound like they want to declare independence. By the same token, they could be pushed to independence if they feel that they're not necessarily being listened to. The Spanish government, for their benefit, is saying, we have the law on our side. We're going to use that law to take your autonomy from you. We're going to take away your self-determination. It's a fascinating story. Let's see. I'm going to put this article at the bottom to read through it. I just think it's an interesting story. That's all. I'm not going to dwell on it. I think the context. I just think it's fascinating context. That's all. Let's see. Good luck. How Catalan's going to fight off the guard civil without guns. Good point. Diesel Dez. They're trying to do it here too with these false flag mass murder events like Vegas. I don't think Vegas is a false flag. I know some people on the left believe that. I'm not one of them. where's the floor? Where's the floor? Like, where's the A, I don't even know why it would be a false flag. I don't know what it would accomplish. B, and this is a divergent point, but I'm just gonna make it real quick. You have as many guns in this country as people. Are you telling me that there are not going to be situations where somebody misuse those guns in horrific and disgusting ways? Of course they are. It's the murder capital of the world in a sense, if you're talking about Western nations. We have mass shootings every day, nearly every day. So it's not this mind-blowing thing that somebody's going to use a gun in a way that kills a lot of people. I'm not shocked in the least. Nobody should be shocked in the least. The country doesn't care about it, so it keeps on ticking. This is why I don't necessarily... There's several reasons I don't think it's false flag, but part and parcel is nothing's going to take place. All of those people are going to die. Nothing's going to take place. It's going to keep ticking along. No gun regulations are going to be passed or anything else. So it's one thing if it's a false flag and it's pushing for a particular thing, like the Gulf of Tonkin, in which case they're trying to push a war. That's one thing, but I don't see it. I don't see it. Debbie Fleetwood, I find it fascinating too. This is a possible model for the future independence of other tyrannical governments, including ours. I'm curious to see what takes place. Let's see what takes place. Let's see what takes place. Is the Spanish government going to use brute force in order to keep its citizens in the country? Or are they just going to have the good damn common sense to actually talk? There's nothing wrong at all with saying, okay, we'll talk. Weakness, it's perceived as weakness though. That's the problem. Human beings interacting in ways that aren't belligerent is perceived as being weakness. The Catalan government wants to talk. They've been putting out these things of saying, we want to talk, we want to talk, we want to talk, we want to talk. Every time they stick a mic in a guy's face, we want to talk, we want to talk, we want to talk. He doesn't seem to have a receptive partner with the Spanish government. The Spanish government is asking, are you independent or not? That's all we want to know. Are you independent or not? So, I'm going to keep an eye on this story because I find this story fascinating. Alright guys, if you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, and subscribe. And of course, you can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks guys.